Position.
Yes.
Have one add-on, a resolution to approve an appropriation adjustment from commissioners into economic development for a payout.
So moved.
Yes. Yes. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, then we have a work session with Matt Schnitke, our economic development. Morning.
Morning, Commissioners. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. So I've got, I think, 3 different topics I need to address with you today, and I know you're on tight schedule, so I'm going to try to be concise, but please stop me if you have questions. First item is the demolition and brownfield remediation grants through the Ohio Department of Development. A few weeks ago, the board had authorized the Port Authority as the lead entity for making applications to the state for those programs. The demolition program is due at the end of February, so working with Suzanne Mason right now with the communities to get sites identified. So that's kind of a separate issue that will be coming probably back in front of the board at a later date. Today, we're talking about the brownfield remediation remediation program. The Port Authority has been working with a environmental consultant to prepare an application. Right as things stand, we have one application that would be for the multi-purpose venue at the Middletown, as part of the Middletown Town Mall redevelopment, using those funds for whatever's really needed out there, whether it's demolition or any sort of cleanup, just general remediation type of items. The county is entitled through the grant program to $1 million that is match-free. Which is what we would be proposing in this application to go for, is just the match-free component of the grant. We're working to finalize that application. The only thing that's outstanding is just the final access agreement with the owner, which we expect to have in hand later today. But the submission is due on the 31st, and part of that submission is a formal resolution by the Board of Commissioners to authorize the lead entity to make the application. And so that's what's in front of you today, would be just that final authorizing resolution. And the request would be I guess to approve that.
Okay. Any questions? Go ahead and read the resolution. Yes.
Have a resolution to approve and authorize the Warren County Port Authority to apply to the Ohio Department of Development for the Brownfield Remediation Grant Program.
So moved.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving along. Item 2 is I have some more information on the, it's another grant program through the Ohio EPA. This is the electric vehicle direct current fast charging stations. This is another program that has a tight turnaround. Applications are due at the end of the month. If it's something that the board wishes to go after, we can get an application together. But just some information on the program. It's a $7 million pot of money that the EPA has. It came down through the Volkswagen settlement. It's part of that whole mitigation trust fund. They're trying to incentivize, it's eligible for non-governmental or governmental entities to install these fast charging stations. Just a point of clarification, there's at least two different types of chargers. There's what's called a level 2 charger, which is charges at a much lower, kilowatt rate. So it takes a little bit longer to charge the vehicle, but it's more conducive to plugging into current electrical infrastructure. This particular grant goes after a fast charging station, which is at a much higher load. It would require some more upfront capital, some transformers and things like that to sort of up the electric load to what's necessary, but then obviously it charges a car all that much faster. These are less common. The fast charging stations are less common than the level 2 stations. You see more of those around. But things that the grant could cover would be the cost of getting the unit, running the wire. It covers labor, installation, all of those types of expenses. For a period of up to 5 years, it'll cover the operation and maintenance costs associated with the charging station. But after that period of time, it is the expectation that the county would take over, own, maintain, operate the station, whether here on the campus. You can charge a fee off of these stations for charging, so that could be a benefit to the county, is being able to, put a charge on for those people that want to come and utilize it. I've talked to a couple surrounding cities and a couple other people who have done at least the level 2 types of chargers, and they've said that the revenue generation is not tremendous. I mean, you'd be talking maybe $5,000, $10,000 a year, so it's not a tremendous amount of money, but it is a little bit of money that the county could glean. The only, I guess, challenges I would maybe point out is, like I said, there is some, for the fast current charging stations at the higher load, there is some upfront work that would need to be done. I spoke with the city of Lebanon's electric department, who obviously is responsible for our campus here, and they did say it would require I think you called it a phase 3 or a 3-phase, Trevor? 3-phase transformer to be installed because of the wattage that's needed. So there would be some of that. The only other potential trouble we might have at maybe this particular location at the admin building would be, there is a requirement that you're within a quarter-mile walking distance of restaurants, retail, things like that, and we are right on the border of downtown Lebanon. When I drew the map, it gets us right to that border of downtown Lebanon, so we might be able to get there. But anyways, I know the board wanted some more information on this particular grant just to determine if it was something that there was any interest in going after. So hopefully I gave you a decent high level, but I'm willing to answer any questions if you have specifics.
Any questions?
I personally don't have an interest in it myself. I think it's too early. I think this is free market, needs to be doing this stuff. Yeah, those level 1 chargers take literally forever. You know, the level 2 stuff. You know, again, we're not a destination. This is an overnight. Someone's already charged their car all night at home. They're not coming here for 2 or 3 hours, and then it's, okay, so we have 2 of those and we have 300 employees who you know.
Yeah. And something else I would point out too is I've had conversations with at least one company, and I know there are others, but there are a lot of companies who would come in and do this type of thing and sort of
Correct,
shoulder
they
the
would
cost.
spend their own capital,
Yeah.
they would do it all, they pay a fee potentially. I just think this is, from my perspective at least, too early. I think this is being pushed a little too hard from my perspective.
Well, how much would the grant cover of the cost of doing this?
So for governmental entities, it can cover up to 100% of the costs for installation, the upfront capital costs. I'd have to double check on like the transformer and some of those types of items. But it could cover 100% of upfront costs, and it also covers 100% of operations and maintenance costs for the first 5 years. But then after that 5th year, it would fall back on
If we
the
make
county.
application for it and we are granted it, but then we decide not to go forward based upon how much they give us, is that something that we can do, or no, once we make application, we've committed to it?
I think in theory, you probably could walk away from it, but I don't know that they want you to do it that way. But
Well, what is your recommendation of what we do?
my recommendation would probably be more in line with Commissioner Young's of if this is of something of interest, probably, you know, try to maybe work with a private provider to do this type of thing, because you're still able to provide that same service to the residents and people who would want to use it, but it's not necessarily something that the county is responsible for the ongoing care and maintenance of. Part of it when I was doing my research was going to be, are we talking, you know, the county has the potential to make a couple $100,000 a year off charging revenue. I just didn't have a ballpark figure where that is. But knowing and hearing what I did from other jurisdictions who have done this, that the revenue is really minimal. I think there's a way to do it if it's something of interest without having to incur sort of the time, energy, resources, and upkeep from the county's
I think
level.
that the limitation around the walking distance to retail and so forth is kind of a limiting factor. I think it's sort of interesting when we look at some of the facilities that we're building up as assets in the community, like the sports park. Like, to me, that seems like a location
And they
where
have
you
them.
have people driving from a far distance, where it could be a revenue generating opportunity, but you'd have to have the infrastructure to be able to support it. But I would think that, you know, you're gonna have a critical mass of people perhaps driving from quite a distance, but that there's no retail within walking distance of that location.
Right, yeah.
And it just seems to me that, notwithstanding, you know, all the things that Dave said, which I would agree with, is that we haven't really done enough to think about where we want to build this infrastructure out in the county. And so if it's something that we might want to do at some point with a private provider, I mean, that might be the conversation that's worth having offline around what are their thoughts about how, I mean, this is not, to me, this does not seem like an ideal location for it, but, so I guess that's a long way to say, I would agree with your assessment and Dave's assessment, but I think it's something that we should be proactive in trying to figure out, because,
That's a good point about the sports complex, that you do, it's more of a destination location, people are driving.
and they're
but-
coming from a far distance.
I think Armco Park actually has a
Yeah.
charging station. I'm not sure how
that
well
would be-
utilized it
And,
is.
and the sports park actually has a couple of the level 2 chargers there, and I talked to Phil yesterday. He said that he didn't have great data on how much they're utilized, but he did say that they do get utilized, especially during tournaments and things when there are
yeah,
massive
So
people
that
out
would
there.
be- To me, that's the kind of data that would be worthwhile
Yeah.
to understand.
And he said he can work to get us that here in time, because I was just kind of curious how much they were utilized there.
And we can revisit that at some point later as well. I know that we have had interest from some county department, well, they are ancillary departments, talking about purchasing county vehicles that are EV and/or hybrids, and what that looks like. And that would be a challenge from a maintenance perspective. We do have some hybrid sheriff's cruisers. I haven't really talked to Nolan lately about the maintenance, but to go all EV that would be a definite shift in our current operations. So it is something to think about in the future if the board decides to pursue something like that.
I'd love to see some of Phil's data and Armco Park's data and looking at maybe similarly situated places that have these fast charging stations. I think, it's where things are going. We don't have to be necessarily on the leading edge, but I think we're past that.
Right, yeah.
And so it just, to get the resources, just to get the resources doesn't feel, I disagree with, I agree with Dave that the timing doesn't feel right, but I think the timing for the conversation is.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll certainly work to get some data from Phil, maybe talk with Armco, see if we can get some better
But we
data
won't-
around.
We won't be applying for this grant cycle. Okay. All right.
Okay. Third and final topic is the results of the RFQ that went out for consultancy services as it relates to broadband and formulating a plan for broadband with the expenditure of ARPA funds. The RFQ went out in December. The responses were due January 14th. We received 4 valid responses. We received another one that was incomplete. We received a late response. But myself, Gary, Paul from Telecom, Adam was there to help us from like a procedural standpoint. We met as the review committee last week and reviewed the responses that came back. We do have a recommendation as to the most qualified firm. So we reviewed it based off of the qualification bullet points that were in the RFQ, obviously. One of those qualification points was a cost estimate. And I will just tell you without, I guess, going down the line, there was, the cost estimates came back a lot higher than we expected. They ranged anywhere from $125,000 to $462,000 for this work. Now, that being said, some of the responders did provide a breakdown where they could sort of à la carte, if you will. You can come in and kind of take certain pieces of the scope at different cost ranges, but I don't know how effective that would be in, for example, skipping around to just pick and choose. When we get down to the bottom where we're expecting a final report, it might not be the deliverable that we were expecting. So I say all that to say is we received the responses, but I think internally as we were talking, we kind of knew that price range was well above what was expected, and wanted to get the board's feedback on if you'd like us to go and negotiate with the most qualified firm and try to negotiate that price down, and then maybe what a acceptable price range for something like this would be to the board.
What I would suggest is there are certain things, at least personally, I know a thing or two about, but the list of the things I don't know anything about is very great, and this is one of those things. I would almost use this as an opportunity to educate the board, bring these 3 firms in and have them tell us, what does this actually look like? What are we really talking about doing? What have you done for other communities? What is the range of services that are involved here? Then we get to the point, I don't know, is $100,000 a lot? Is $500,000 a lot? I have no idea. I have a feeling I know, but when they're in the game and they're wanting to do business with us, why not take this opportunity to get 3 different professional opinions on something of, again, I don't know exactly what it means. Let's provide broadband throughout the county. I literally don't even know exactly what that looks like. So why not use this opportunity of these people that want to educate us and lead us down this path? Why not get 3 different perspectives of what does that even look like, and spend, half an hour with each one of them just to go through, because again, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Sure. And I think that's easily doable. I think we could invite them in and do a work session or something along those lines. I think that's very doable, as long as that doesn't.
Tiffany's giving me the look. That's fine.
No, I want to make sure that.
That's in your RFQ, that you had a discretion to interview the firms, and so that would just count that as sort of a presentation or interview?
Yeah, every one of these RFP, we go
Yeah.
through and we do interviews on it. It's at the discretion of the board.
Right, so that's contemplated in your public notice that you may ask for an interview, and I think it's perfectly acceptable to say, can you come in and give us the pitch in person so we can understand, so we know, is it apples and oranges, or are we comparing similar services? Another interesting thing I thought to note was 2 of the 4 statements of qualifications, those companies involve law firms, and so some of them are pitching legal services with it, which I don't know if we need at this stage, but maybe you need down the road. I don't know, but that was hard for me to wrap my mind around, being an attorney. Do you need legal services at this stage or not? And so, yeah, to hear from them and get them to kind of explain that might be good. And some of them were had a lot of cell tower experience. Some of them had project management experience. Some of them had construction experience. So they were sort of, their background was a little all over the place too. And each one of those backgrounds may be just a piece of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle. So,
Which is why I think it would be very
Yeah.
prudent to bring probably 3 of them in. One of the law firms and 2 of the other folks that are either in the construction side of it or the tower side of it. Bring them in, let's talk to them, because again, we're educating ourselves on something that we're contemplating spending millions of dollars on.
Sure. Yeah, we will go down the list. We did have a ranking system that we used through the RFQ, so I'll get in contact with our top 3 firms, and we'll schedule them in for interviews.
But that's okay with the board.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think that makes sense.
Okay, we'll get those scheduled with Tina.
Will do. That's all I had, unless you have other questions for me.
I appreciated the email that you sent in advance, so giving us a chance to review everything. So
Yeah, that
thanks
was
for doing
Martin's suggestion. He said if you got a lot to cover, so maybe give a little bit
Yeah,
of a
that
heads
was
up.
really helpful. I came prepared to understand, so thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Trevor? I take it.
Shannon, Dave, Tom, good morning. We got Judge Fisher and Judge Loxley with us this morning. Got my Deputy Director Betsy here, and also have Jim Boris and Brad Adams, our criteria architect team here. So last time we met about this, we looked at some floor plans, possible locations for the new county court building. At the request of the board, you guys wanted to expand the size of the building for future growth, add an extra courtroom, extra judges' chambers. So Jim and Brad are gonna present some new drawings to you, some new budget numbers today. Obviously, inflation, material shortages have driven cost up since last time we looked at it, so. I'll let Jim and Brad present to you the new information here, and then I want to circle back to you at the end about possibly doing a master plan study on our facilities before we pull the trigger on this project.
And just to refresher, where are we talking about putting this?
We had talked about over between Common Pleas and the juvenile probate building. So we do have a few restrictions over there. We can't do a single-story facility in that spot just because of space. It would have to be a two-story facility.
That's Common Pleas, that's juvenile, so right
I'm
there.
sorry, all three plans would be in the same location or not?
Don't have to be.
All right, I mean, I.
We didn't finalize the location last time, and we had a location we liked, but it wasn't a final.
And we've done surveys and those kind of actual land surveys since then, so.
When we
I'm sure
picked
those
that site last time, that was before we wanted to expand the building. So
Well,
that's created a few
So
restrictions.
the last, if you want to click to the last one, has your aerial, I believe.
Yeah,
Because that just came late yesterday.
All right, because that's not
This.
included. Oh, I see.
Yes.
So
Oh,
here's,
there it is,
you
yeah,
can
that's,
show him the
that's the
wedge.
one from last, yeah. There you go.
Please, probate. Yeah, because we were talking about adding basically at the end of common pleas, correct? Domestic relations, wasn't it right in there?
That was the original plan. The judges at Common Pleas didn't want to proceed with that in case Common Pleas ever has to expand out.
And I think that that was your final,
Yeah.
direction too. You didn't want to add on to that building to limit the current occupants, so you chose the ground in between.
wedge, yeah.
The wedge.
All right.
The issue with this is if we go with a bigger building with future expansion, it would have to be a two-story building on that site because there's just not enough room to build it as a one-story building. And as you'll see with the numbers that Jim and Brad present, it's going to be a cheaper option to keep it a one-story building than to go 2 stories. So
So one
if-
story where?
possibly move back across the street. Go back somewhere over in this location here.
What, demolish?
Well,
demolish
county
the
court's
old jail?
currently right here, yeah. Demolish some of the jail facility to make room for him.
So we would take down some of the old jail facility as well as the current county court facility?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay,
What-
is there any use of that? If we made a completely separate structure, what would we do with what we currently have?
If you want to reuse any of this county court, old sheriff's office facility, it's going to need extensive remodeling. So it would be up to the board if they want to spend that money to upgrade the building, or would it be better just to demolish it?
All right, so in what you've proposed, because you've got a one-story plan, which is a larger footprint, is that right?
Correct,
And then you've got a two-story and a partial second story that have the same footprint, is that right?
correct.
All right, and so those two plans would go in the exact same location, correct?
Yeah, the 2-story and the partial 2-story could both fit
All right.
over
And
here
the
in this
only
space.
it appears that the cost per square foot is identical with everything. Is that right?
It's close. But in the 2-story option, you have to add stairwells, elevators, extra restrooms because you have that second level. So it makes the square footage grow on the building. Whereas if we keep it 1 story, it can be more compact.
Okay, but still the cost per square foot, it was listed as $286 for each structure.
Just requires more square footage.
Correct.
I get that.
Correct.
And the only difference then is the higher square footage, and the difference then in price you've set forth with, basically, I don't completely understand, the single-story base plan, what's the difference between that and the single-story with courtroom expansion? Is that?
The single-story base was the one we started out with, and that just included 1 courtroom and 1 chamber area.
Okay, and we've rejected that.
No expansion.
Correct.
No
You-
expansion.
You guys wanted to add the second courtroom
Right,
and second
right.
chamber area.
Okay, so that one, so the only then real difference is between, all of them have 2 courtrooms, but the difference is the size and the cost. And so I guess my interest is in knowing, unless the other people have some, because I've read through the material, so I understand what you're proposing and the numbers. but I don't know what would be best for the future and what would be best for our current, judges and their court staff and what their needs are.
One of my biggest concerns with building over here, and I think Judge Fisher and Judge Loxley can help on this, would be if we build the extra courtroom space and that building gets to the point where it's fully utilized, are we going to have enough area for the public to park out around the building? If Common Pleas grows, if this building gets fully utilized, are we going to run out of space to put people on this side?
Well, and Trevor, the issue that, and I know we're gonna hear from, from these guys, so we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves, but as I was going through the materials, the thing that always comes back to me is, it's as if we can't reconcile the fact that we have infrastructure that has outlived its useful life, so we just keep sitting it there and not having a real conversation about what are we doing with this, and then how does this project and other projects in our future growth feed into it? Because it's like, the thing has outlived its useful life. We either have to understand what it's gonna cost to make it useful again, and whether or not we're willing to spend that, or we're gonna have to do something with it. And to me, it's like we've just been sitting here waiting for Godot on, something magically is gonna change the infrastructure that's terrible. So for me, that conversation this screams like we gotta know what we're doing here.
Right. You're absolutely right. And that's the comment I made earlier about proposing the master plan study. I've got an RFQ prepared, to put out for a firm to come in and do a facilities master plan study on everything we have, not just this county court issue here, but this campus, the Silver Street campus, our outliers. Because I think when we dove into this project, we were just looking, where does county court fit the best? And we weren't thinking about building B, C, and D that may be on the horizon here. So I think we want to hit pause on this project until we look at the whole, the campus as a whole, and make sure we're doing this the way we want to. I would hate to build county court in a location that's going to hinder, the next projects we have on the horizon.
Well, I mean, because the real fact is that if we put it in that location, which seems to be the best location if we keep everything the same, but then the other major court, which is gonna be clearly expanding in the future, are the courts of common pleas.
Correct.
And, I don't expect that the juvenile court is gonna need anything in the near future, but clearly the court of common pleas is going to expand, and this is in the territory of where that is. And then we've got this older building, an older jail, which are now, the jail is, okay, it's not being used. We don't know how we're gonna repurpose that. I mean, I've heard some ideas, but it seems to me, I agree with the idea that we really have to know what's the best future, looking out a couple of decades for this campus.
Correct.
And it seems to me if we do a new structure in this location, which right now is maybe the best way to go in terms of the short term, but then we haven't solved we've created a future problem with expansion in the Common Pleas Court, and then we've got this big white elephant over there, as maybe this was Shannon, Commissioner Jones' point, that we're just sort of waiting for that to magically transform itself into a princess or a prince or something.
Well, I think we've not really ever heard any firm direction on what you want to do with the asset. Early on it was, well, maybe we should hold on to it. We've never really had the conversation, to Commissioner Jones's point, of reconciling the fact that it is no longer a viable asset for the amount of money that we'd have to put into it.
Well, initially, it was by design to leave it as is because we didn't know the outcome of the current construction. And that was something that was so mission critical, we had to have a backup plan. We built this new jail. We think it's okay. We think it's going to do this. But if we would have started demolition, the day after the new jail opens, and all of a sudden we would have had, radon gas or something crazy that would have come in that was completely off the rails, what do we do? So it was by design, we left this kind of mothballed for some period of time. But I think it's an appropriate conversation to say, now that we know the new jail works and it's efficient, it's good, staffing is as expected, everything has gone by design, we know it's functional, we know it's efficient. Now we have this very inefficient use of a taxpayer asset, which is the real asset over there is the land.
Right.
The land is the taxpayer asset. Now we have outdated old buildings that we were trying to say, before we go and raise these buildings, community, consultants, staff, anyone give us something that we can repurpose this with very minimal cost to get utilization out of it. To date, we've heard nothing. We talked about a DUI facility and this and that, and that's what I was pushing it for some period of time, but for very good rational reasons, those were all shot down. That's not an efficient place to do it. It's not good to do it that way. That's not the real world. So you haven't heard me say boo about, oh, we have to repurpose it. We have to use it. So if the answer is, and again, I think this is the way, literally looking at a picture like this, we came up with the idea of moving the jail where it is. No one was talking about putting the jail there. It was looking at this map and saying, wait a second, we just take this road out, why don't we put it over here where all the land is? Oh yeah, pretty good idea. So now, as I sit here and look at this thing, it's like, okay, I get that. Our initial master plan was just to put end caps on that L-shaped Common Pleas Court building. One potentially for Common Pleas Court, one for the prosecutor's office, which we built back behind it, then one for the actual court facilities themselves, but then you've got domestic relations there, the clerk of courts, all these entities potentially are growing. So these two conceptual end caps on each side of that building might still happen, but it's not necessarily for county court.
Correct.
Because there's enough demands potentially on the current users of that facility that they're gonna all have to expand. So now, as you sit here and look at it, that is the natural next progression of why not use that space? So, yeah, I think that's a valid question. The only thing I would say that is also where they keep the SWAT vehicles or whatever, that building, that really needs to move.
Correct.
We've heard that a few times.
And we've had discussions, if we do a new drug task force facility, probably incorporate that into that new building so we can get that out of the way. And one thing I want to point out from a cost perspective is this T here that's currently county court in the old sheriff's office, the cost we got back to renovate that area was pushing $4 million. You could demolish all this for less than $500,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
That is unbelievable.
We could save some labor cost. I'd love to get on one of those big machines.
I mean, and would that make it ready for redevelopment?
Correct. Yeah, that would be, we could leave all this parking lot up in the front and reuse it, demolish all this. All the utilities on the site come into this area back in here, so if we developed it, we would want to have some sort of building overlap that spot there for all the utilities to come into, but that's the best piece of ground we have right now.
Well, that cost of demolition changes a lot in terms of my perspective of where we would put something.
And the idea behind this work session is so that you could see from our original conversations about what this building was going to cost. So if there's any heartburn about that, we'd get it out of the way now.
And I think, but to Tom's point it's twofold. It's like, yes, there is that cost factor, but the flip side of that is, what does the expansion of Common Pleas that we know, the parking and other things, it's like, wanting to keep that together in close proximity, wanting the parking to be in close proximity. Like, it's both and I do recall, when we had this conversation about this wedge, is that there was some question about, both costs and of a second story, but also practicality of it.
Especially,
I'm, obviously, the entire board is big on saving money, being respectful of taxpayer dollars. But if there was ever a time to do something right, it is now. This is the time to have a master plan. This is the time to get this campus looking exactly the way we want it, because we are flush with cash. This is the time, for the next 20, 30, 40 years, that we could set this up of actually having some forethought of saying, what do we want this place to look like? What's the most efficient way to lay this out? This would be the time to do it.
correct. Yeah, because we're not only talking about county court, like I said, drug task force needs a new facility, Board of Elections has space issues, Health and Human Services, their building is in rough shape. I mean, we have a lot of space issues that are kind of coming to a head here at the same time, so that's why I think it's critical that we take a step back and do this master plan study.
What are our costs for quote mothballed operations for the old jail?
For the old jail, I would say we're spending probably upwards of $1,000 a month, just for minimal lighting and to keep air circulating within the building.
And, all right, so when would we get this study performed? When would that happen?
We could post the RFQ within the week. It would take a couple weeks for firms to submit their qualifications, and then at that point, we choose who we want and create a contract.
What is our parameters of the study that we want them to perform? What are we asking them exactly to do?
I think what they would do is they would take this campus, the Silver Street campus, and our outlier buildings like the mechanics garage, the highway department, the title building, look at the occupancy, look at how much space is utilized in the buildings, see if maybe we can shift some pieces around within the buildings to better utilize those, but then look at the future construction, look at the sites we have left, and tell us, a best plan as far as what we should do, new construction versus renovating
Can you point out
what
the
we have.
pieces of property on campus that we actually do own, Trevor, for the commissioners?
Yeah. So, new jail and sheriff's office here, the prosecutor's building here, common pleas, probate juvenile. This is the impound lot that the sheriff's office still uses.
But the tree line is our property line,
The
right?
tree line
This
is our
here.
property line.
Yep,
The,
right
the
here.
front of HHS, you see the vacant spots in front of HHS?
We own those.
Okay,
here,
so,
yeah.
yeah, and we did deed some of BDD to BDD, but that kind of below the tree line where the driveway is, just north of the tree line, yep, right there. And then we own in front of the school. Yeah,
Yeah.
in front of Donovan School, that whole
About
corner.
right through the middle of their parking lot
Yeah.
right here.
So
We own all those.
We have an easement with the school for the parking and the access, but that is our actual,
Oh, we actually own that.
we
I-
own
Yeah.
to the corner,
I actually
yes.
didn't know that.
Yeah, our property line's through the middle of their parking
their
lot
park,
right there.
yeah.
All the way down to the street?
All the way down to the street. So that's a pretty substantial piece of property that's vacant. Obviously, we'd have to be conscious of whatever if we ever in the future decided to build something there, we'd have to be conscious of the school.
Well, no,
It-
I think the most common sense thing, if we put the way we did the jail hat on, is almost building the new facility immediately behind the current courthouse that no, I mean, literally 20 feet behind
Yep.
where that way you keep the current courthouse up and running while you're doing the construction.
Yep.
You move it a little bit closer to our admin building to where then you can tie in the parking lots for overflow. And then that's where potentially you do have in this new facility, do you put Board of Elections in there? Because apparently that's been problematic to have the flow of individuals there. That way you tie in two ginormous parking lots to where parking will never be an issue.
Correct.
And flow in and out would be fine, and you put Board of Elections into this new facility, potentially, would what, you know, I would think, if we were looking at what's our best case scenario, you know, you do something that's not disruptive to the current operations, you start building literally right behind them, you tear down the rest of the stuff where you call it the T of the old sheriff's office comes into the common, or the county court building, you literally demo all the rest of it, and then you start building right there.
Yeah, we could cut it off right across there and demolish that whole back part and build just as close to it as we can, like you said. Because right now, county court's using most of the T right now.
Do you guys need the entire T?
Well,
Even short term?
We planned on using it, just based upon the fact that it was vacant, but, you know, that far right side of the T now has been vacated by the sheriff's office. And so, you know, just this week, we should be finishing moving a lot of our probation staff into that right side of the T there. So the middle part of the T that goes north, it goes to the back, we do have some offices there where probation is currently located, but we had anticipated moving the prosecutor and the victim advocate back there because now that we have more space.
I would almost try to do some temporary space for those folks and cut off the entire T, literally just use that.
one issue on that, the mechanical room for the building is in that.
They don't need heat or air.
We're tough. We can do it.
I'm sure you've been in worse.
Army tents? Yeah.
Okay.
We can talk, we can,
Strike that,
we
well,
can
yeah,
look,
we're
we
getting
can
into the
look at
minutia of
that.
it, but it's, I mean, at least
Did you have it?
what I would see as the most efficient use of the space in the campus, because again, tying in our very underutilized admin building parking lot, I'd like to see that used in these high utilization periods, which
Correct.
would be around elections.
Yeah, I've mentioned to Tiff a few times where my facility is right here, how good of a build site that would be for possibly Board of Elections or a new Health and Human Services building because of the parking access. I don't use any of this, but I'm right up against
And
it.
that's why I'm saying, why not do the new county court immediately to the right of
Yeah.
that? You know, almost in that, just maybe even a little left of where you were showing. That's the new building in there, and it ties into that new parking lot.
And Board of Elections, which is currently down here, during the early voting cycles, you'll have hundreds of people here on the weekends voting, which they can't accommodate right now, and it would be great if they had access to that parking lot.
Correct. I think that's, if we're gonna do it, that's almost a non-negotiable with me. We have to utilize that parking lot.
Yep.
And that is the time, you've gotta be able to tie in, you know, this is almost the auxiliary parking lot for county court, assuming we're gonna put Board of Elections in there also.
Gotcha.
But no one's scared of the price.
Which price?
Well, I'm just saying in general, no one's, because our original thought was we could do it for $4.5 million.
Oh.
And
That's
in
clearly
today's
not
market, we
possible.
know that we can't do that. I mean, obviously, so I just want to make sure nobody's scared.
I mean, we need it, I don't.
We
I
do.
don't-
Well, how soon do we need to act on this?
I think if you want to go ahead with the master plan study, we need to act on it today. We'll get the RFQ posted and start getting firms in here to negotiate with.
I think that that's what we'd like to do.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at how this has all developed over the years, and I'm not blaming anything for anybody, but if somebody were actually planning this out, this would not what this would look like.
Right.
But it's because it's happened over a long period of time with many different people and with just sort of like it's just kind of happened. And nobody's ever really had a master plan for this site. It just sort of like, it started being developed kind of ad hoc. And I think that it's worthwhile for us not to start to do this differently. I don't know if we ever want to put stuff out there to the west, but that is a lot of property over there.
Yeah, this is a large piece of ground here.
Yeah, hopefully it
large
can remain
piece, yeah.
green, but, you never know, 50 years from now, at least the board controls it. I'd like to hear from the architects. What do you guys think of what we're kicking around?
I definitely agree with the master plan, because there's so many sites that people, just as you're saying, you build something here and then you're doing negative construction later on down the road. So I think that absolutely the master plan is the right way to go, and even to locate the building, the courts building that we've been working on, I think it's a good idea to do that master plan, look at future needs, current needs, and develop the whole plan, and then place this building on that site. So I agree with everything you're saying here, and I think it's all good direction.
So what does, how long does this process take? Like, I'm super sensitive to the needs of the court, and, is this a 6 month, 18 months, 24 months? Like, what are we talking about time frame?
I think a typical master plan of this size, you probably do need to allow 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, by the time you meet with all the different entities, look at different options. I mean, there's just a lot of players that would need to be involved to make good decisions on it, laying out the options, going through them. Yeah, it's gonna take 6 months to do a real
But
nice
during that
master
time,
plan.
that doesn't prevent us from actually doing the demo on the old jail and that. We could do that.
Not at all.
Yeah, we could do that concurrently.
Absolutely.
Judge, I'm assuming that your ability to use some of the vacated space does relieve some of your pressure while we're undertaking this?
It does, and we're looking at it as a temporary fix for obvious reasons. Trevor says that building needs a lot of work, but we're going to make do. We're able to spread our elbows out a little bit, and we didn't have the luxury of doing that before. That's the reason why we're using the whole T, really, except for a couple offices on the far right-hand side. But we'll be patient, and I think, and I'll let Judge Fisher speak here in a minute. I'll give him the microphone, but we're with you. We want to make sure it's done right, okay? Whether that's 6 months for a master plan and another year and a half, 2 years for the full construction. The only thing that I would mention, and it's probably more for the architects than anything else, if you have a second courtroom, I would strongly recommend that be the same size as the original courtroom. And I know on the designs that were slated for presentation today on the second floor, that courtroom is smaller. And I think if you're, from the commissioner's perspective, if you're looking for county court to have that second courtroom for possible expansion, it should be the same size.
Is that because you don't want to have a differentiation between the two judges?
No.
It's sort of like one judge doesn't want the smaller courtroom and the other judge the larger one.
I would defer to Gary anyway. But no, it really has everything to do with if we're going to consolidate the courts into 2 courts, they're going to need to be of equal size because we have so much growth throughout the county, and we're going to have to make sure that we have enough room for it. But my thought is, as I was sitting here listening, is really twofold. As a current occupant of the county court, we're grateful that we're going through this process, that the county commissioners want to get it right for the court itself. As a citizen of the county, I'm really grateful of the look at the master plan to make sure that the whole use of the campus is going to be proper. I like the fact that you're looking at the parking spaces that are not really being utilized right now as a potential part because we are going to need a lot of parking. So having the parking that's already there is beneficial to us. So as looking at it both as a current occupant and a citizen of the county, we're grateful at this master plan.
So what then do you need from us today? Like, just direction moving forward, or?
Yeah, approve posting the RFQ for the master plan search.
Have a resolution to authorize the request for qualification for professional services for the purpose of providing a facility master plan study with ending product being a facilities master plan.
So moved.
Yes.
Yes.
So I guess it's coming. You guys are next up. You're getting tapped off the bench. Come on up. We got everybody else in the game. You guys might as well come along too. But if we're gonna do it, yeah, again, I think it was very prudent from the taxpayer's point of view that we didn't know what we didn't know. And we had a substantial, it wasn't efficient, but it was a functional jail and space that we had, and we didn't know exactly what was gonna happen upon this transfer. Now we do know. Everything's fine. It's good. It's as advertised. So now, we essentially have this, I would call it a disaster mechanically of an inefficient space that we can't do anything else with, right? Because you went down that whole path of the cinder blocks and mechanically and getting to it. You really can't repurpose that for anything else, correct?
Correct.
So all it's doing is taking up space and costing us money to maintain it. So for $500,000, let's get rid of it, and then we've got another big construction site that's readily available and buildable, and then we can do it right. Yeah, my only wish was that we could eliminate all the way up to the building, the T, because that would allow us to move that footprint forward, correct, architects, if we could do that? So we can think about that and maybe angle it and get it up close, and you guys can, that's what you do for a living, so you can think about those things, and that would get it to where it's as close to the road frontage as possible to leave the space even behind it open. But then, again, sliding it closer to the admin parking lot to where we can tie that in would be my direction.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right.
And I do want to thank the judges for their patience during this process. I know you guys have waited a long time, and I know you probably didn't want to hear there's going to be another 6-month delay in it, but I appreciate your patience in working with us on this.
I'm just glad you guys are patient. Judge Flannery, 12, 14 years ago, I think he was gonna put me in jail for not building a jail or building a common police courthouse when, he thought it was due. So, I was always happy he didn't order me into the pokey.
Don't give us any ideas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you all.
You bet. Thanks for coming today, all. Good. Yeah, you guys can leave if you like, or you can stay for the exciting next event.
Tammy, you made our packet very lengthy this week. Lots of documents.
I sent you all the details though, just in case.
First
Yeah,
page is the
no.
most important
We
page.
appreciate it.
Okay, so I'm here about the COVID home test mandate that is now in effect, is on health plans as of January the 15th. I did ask Katie to come over and talk about the actual mandate and where it derives from and the legalities about that as to the extent that we, that's adopted by the board or any penalties if not. So, Katie?
Thanks. So, you may remember in March of 2020, there was the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, was passed. And among other things in that act was a mandate to group health plans to cover certain diagnostic tests and medical treatment related to COVID-19. And at that time, there had to be some medical involvement in the diagnosis or the treatment. There had to be a medical provider involved or a clinician involved. Well, that's what's changed recently, is that now the Secretary of Health and Human Services has issued additional guidance that says now we're going to cover, or now group plans are required to cover over-the-counter testing. And that's up to 8 free over-the-counter at-home tests per covered individual per month. So if you do the math, that means a family of 4, all on the same plan, that's 32 tests per month, up to $12 per test. So Tammy did some math. I'm going to let her talk to you about the math on that. But that's the new requirement that Tammy asked me to just outline for you. That's enforced through the Secretary of Health and Human Services. The enforcement involves, if a group plan is not in compliance, the maximum fine is $100 per day per individual. And so that becomes pretty lengthy. We don't have to necessarily get into those enforcement provisions unless you want to talk about those more, but there is some enforcement mechanism for the mandate, just so that you're aware of that.
Thank you, Katie. So from a plan perspective and the cost, we currently have 1,959 covered individuals under the plan. So, this emergency period is till April the 15th. But assuming that will be extended, looking at on an annual basis, eight tests per covered member per month equals $2.25 million planned cost over a year's time. That money is not budgeted for. So with that, that's the impact of the plan. If we're looking at just a 3-month period, it's $564,000. In addition to that, if we use a company such as Optum to administer this benefit for us, there are some administration fees involved in that, and that's $235,000 for a year period. For a 3-month period, it's $58,000. So I guess the decisions to make is, are we going to administer? Are we going to provide this coverage? Who is to administer? And some other options, as we have this discussion.
But that's the maximum cost.
That's the maximum.
I mean, that's assuming every covered live uses their 8 tests per month for the entire period of time.
Correct. So I do think with the carriers, there is a fear of stockpiling. There's a fear of this test being sold. So there is some, their client base is concerned about this. I did look at some reports. Through our health plan, we've had about 20% of our population that has been vaccinated, at least 1 dose, maybe 2, maybe even boosted. That does not include, those are claims that have hit Optum or United Healthcare.
Say that again.
How do we even know that? Because we're not paying for it.
I get reports. So through the health department, we are not paying, I would say we have quite a few members. That's not in the 20%. So we do have quite a few members that are going to the health department. I know I did. I think many people do. So that's not in the 20%. But those are claims if somebody goes to Optum and they get the immunization, the pharmacy is charging an administration fee for that. So that's how they are able to keep track.
Seriously, so if somebody gets vaccinated, they can go to their doctor theoretically and get the shot, and all of a sudden that goes through health insurance.
Correct.
Like
We're tested.
Kroger.
We're tested.
Through a pharmacy.
Kroger, Walgreens, Walmart.
So, but if you go through the health department, I mean, those are all just provided by the federal government, correct?
So that's the immunizations. Yeah, if you go over to the health department, there's no out-of-pocket expense. I mean, it's just all, but it's a hard record to find out who has, because they're doing the mass majority of the county and is so not specific to Warren County employees, so it's hard to get that number. But the ones who have gone elsewhere, whether it be through a doctor, whether it be through a pharmacy, to get those immunizations where the health plan is used, either the medical plan with United Healthcare or Optum under the prescription plan, that's information that we can get. And what that says is we've had 440 members utilize the plan for the immunization. So to your point, Shannon, those who have been immunized, you would think that they would not need the quantity out there that is permitted under this mandate. So you would hope that would curtail, those individuals would curtail at least the number that I quoted, the 2.256 million over a year period. That would the maximum exposure based on those lives. So.
Well, you'd have to be able to find the tests, by the way.
True.
I mean, I don't know if any of y'all tried to get tested, but, I couldn't even find a test.
Yeah, they're difficult, and with this mandate, it's not, the federal government just last week allowed 4 per household, 4 test kits per household. And with this mandate, they have some safe harbors out there. And one would be to use, through United Healthcare, they're able to administer this benefit for us. In doing so, it's not the recommended, it wouldn't be, who we would recommend to administer the benefit, and that they cannot track, the quantity, as well as what Optum could.
Because they're our pharmacy
That's
benefit
correct.
provider.
That's
and
correct.
they already have the infrastructure in place, they're already used to paying a pharmacy fee for the management of it.
Correct, and through Optum, it would require, there needs to be a preferred retailer. Currently, the retailers are not set up to handle the processing of these claims, however, Walmart is. Walmart, Sam's Wholesale, or Sam's Club. The carriers are looking to add more retailers to it. But currently, I venture to say if you go to Walmart or anywhere to get these tests, you're probably not going to find them in stock. As long as the plan uses a process where there is a preferred retailer, the usual and customary cost of the test is $12 per test. And as long as we are using a preferred retailer, even if that retailer is out of stock, the member could go elsewhere. They would have to pay out of pocket if they go elsewhere. If they go to Walmart, they would pick it up, go to the pharmacy counter, and it would run through at a zero copay to them, and then we would be charging the $12. If they go elsewhere, they would have to pay out of pocket, and then the plan, we couldn't be charged higher than that reasonable amount, which is currently $12.
So that's a way of limiting our exposure financially by going the Optum route with the preferred provider of Walmart. And I think that's what we're recommending if you so choose not to opt out, and then Katie can, as Katie's indicated, what the potential risk of that would be.
The Optum administration is just, it provides some better safeguards to, abuse of the plan. They're able to track it better, to where if an individual is going from one pharmacy to the next to get the supply that they're allowed, United Healthcare really loses control of that. Their system is not set up to monitor, hey, Tammy Whitaker got, 8 at CVS, and then she went to Walgreens and got 8 more. So there's things, I think that Optum would provide the better administration for the plan's sake. I believe that when you can't find it in stock, or if you go to if you go to a provider, not in stock at Walmart, but you go to CVS, they're not the preferred retailer, you have to pay out of pocket for that. File a reimbursement, so that reimbursement filing by the member will cause a pain point on that, which may help to curtail, some stockpiling and things that would happen.
Yeah, because they have to come up with the cash.
True, yes, that would.
And they're only going to be reimbursed $12.
Right, because we have set up through Optum or United Healthcare that preferred retailer. If we didn't have that, if we didn't set up that process, they could go wherever, file for reimbursement, and we lose that, the plan loses that protection of that usual and customary rate. So, if it was $15 for the test, the plan would be required to reimburse $15 for the test, because we do not have that process set up with them, with our carriers.
I guess fundamentally, as the administrator of the county's healthcare plan, do I think the county should pay for COVID tests for our participants? Yes. I think that's a reasonable expectation, like, under your health care, that, hey, I've got to get tested, I have to do this. Is that a reasonable expectation for my health care plan to pay for a test? Well, I would say, yeah, that's reasonable. I don't like this mandate because it seems unreasonable to me. They're forcing us to do certain things. They're forcing us to do 8. I think it is wide open for abuse. I'm not saying inside of Warren County, I don't really anticipate that, but is this mandate ripe for abuse potentially? Yeah, stockpiling, reselling. My provider has to give these to me for free. I know I can go resell them, somebody that's not covered and what have you, and it's gonna be an income stream for me. I don't like that at all. Adam?
They have to sign an affidavit though, don't they?
They, that's one way to curtail some of the potential fraud. And that's one of the recommendations in the guidance. I think United Healthcare has already set up sort of an attestation for when you submit for reimbursement.
So you're saying if somebody says I have to get tested twice this week, each time they're getting a test, who in the world's collecting an affidavit?
I think at the time of reimbursement, that's when they're doing when they submit, when they go on UnitedHealthcare.com and submit their reimbursement, or however it's done, however it's administered, that's when you're.
So are they paying for it out of pocket and then the plan
Correct.
reimburses?
Correct, in that situation, yes.
I believe if you went to Optum and you used you found it in stock, you used your insurance card, maybe at the point of sale, where you sign for your prescription, I would venture to say, I don't know that exact process, but I would venture to say that there is probably, this is a whole separate plan that our carriers have set up. So it's kind of separate from our actual prescription plan. But I would venture to say that such language would be, on where you sign
Yeah, I mean, you
for
do
your
that to buy
prescription.
Sudafed now. I mean, there's mandates in law that require for over-the-counter, some over-the-counter drugs, you sign an affidavit saying, I'm not gonna cook meth with this.
But that doesn't mean, that we're not policing it either.
No, but I mean,
Yeah,
they-
you have a document.
I'm just reinforcing Tammy's point about this choice versus going through United Healthcare, because they have an infrastructure that has that in place. I think you're probably right. You do that, it's already set up now for lots of things. Not just, I picked up my prescription, but this is an over-the-counter drug that the law says I can't
Resell.
And use it to cook meth.
Right, because that mandate is out there, and the plans have set up, the carriers have set up to process that. I'm sure that because that affidavit language is out there in the mandate, that I would imagine that they would have addressed that. I can find out for sure on that, but I imagine that is taken care of. It could be something that, if this is something announced to employees, which I don't believe that we have an announcement requirement, that we've already met that with other pieces of the CARES Act and the Affordable Care Act and whatnot, maybe we send out something to employees that this coverage is out there, and include that language that would be on an affidavit. That would be something to, just something internally that, that this has the potential for abuse, and that by using this benefit, you acknowledge that this is for personal use, not to be sold, cannot be used for the purposes of employment. So we talked about that, I think, right, Katie?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So, let me make sure I understand this. So, and there's been all sorts of challenges on these mandates and, vaccination mandates, testing mandates for private companies. And what's the status of, the stays that have gone on and the various different court proceedings? Do any of those affect the mandate for us to do something?
Not this particular mandate, no. The stay that was overturned really was an OSHA mandate. The other one was had to do with just Medicare and Medicaid, doesn't really affect us. This mandate is separate, excuse me.
And this is a
From those.
mandate from the executive branch of the government?
Correct.
This is not something that has been passed in legislation by Congress?
Correct. This is it's issued through a guidance document that was authorized by a separate congressional act, yes.
Okay, so is this a regulatory act, or is this a executive act of the president? What is this?
This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services issued additional guidance on the FFCRA and the Public Health Services Act mandates. The Public Health Services Act has been around for a long time. That's what the Affordable Care Act says. We have to cover X, Y, and Z under our health care. So this newest mandate really just amends some of those coverage requirements.
So they have the authority to do that, and so I want to know, what are we absolutely required to do? And that, of course, we have to fulfill what we're absolutely required to do, and I take it that no one is challenging this then?
I haven't seen any challenges. I kind of looked around for those and haven't seen any.
Because I don't really completely understand. I don't disagree with Commissioner Young that, having us cover a test or two with regard to this when somebody really is ill. And of course, when members of my family thought they had COVID, we went out and we bought a test. I know that those have gotten scarcer, but at the time we were doing it last fall, we all were able to get tests. And one of my daughters went out and got tests from the libraries down in Cincinnati, I guess. They were giving them out. I don't think that was going around here. And I guess that was being provided by the federal government or some government. I don't know exactly who's putting them in libraries. But once again, my fundamental problem with this is I don't know what the purpose of this exactly is. I mean, I get the fact that we want to test for people that are really ill to find out and then help them, but at the same time, this idea of trying to mandate 8 tests for everybody and pay for that up front, is that what we're doing?
That's the requirement.
Katie, when you say requirement, in the synopsis, I'm only reading one bullet point, it says, the guidance, and guidance are not mandates, the guidance, quote, strongly encourages plans.
Where is that? Is that in Tammy's bullet points?
That was in the actual.
It incentivizes plans. So I have seen that language where it says it strongly incentivizes plans to cover the cost up front. So for example, to use your pharmacy provider or your administrator, and so that way when you go to the preferred pharmacy, like a Walmart, or I think that's what Optum is planning on using.
Right.
You don't have any cost out of pocket when you go there and pick up a test. That's what's being incentivized by the reimbursement there being capped at $12. If you were to go outside of that or through your medical benefit, you could be reimbursed at the total cost. So if you find a test for $75, the plan would be required to cover that whole, reimburse that whole cost if it was out of pocket to the individual who went to buy it.
Right, the other bullet points are using the word must.
Well,
I mean, where I was going with it was thinking about, I get an itchy trigger finger sometimes. I haven't sued the federal government in a while. Over the Affordable Care Act was the last time this board did it. And so I was kind of contemplating, do we have any wiggle room? Because we are not a normal insurance company.
Right, and
We're a self-insured entity, and no one pays premiums here. We use taxpayer dollars to fund this. So literally, the federal government is mandating how we spend local tax dollars, is essentially what they're doing.
correct.
And so that's where I was contemplating in the back of my mind, do we legally have any room to go down that rabbit hole of, you can't force us to do this, because it is tax dollars that we're using on this plan. But there are certain things as the healthcare provider, they do mandate that we do. Our wiggle room on the last case was when they were collecting a fee back from us, and the fee was technically a tax. And one governmental entity cannot tax another governmental entity. And that's what we filed our federal claim on. And that's not what's happening here. They're requiring us through this mandate to come in and spend taxpayer dollars in a very specific way. So I'm trying to, that's the rabbit hole I'm kind of spinning around in my mind right now. And I think that's where Commissioner Grossman was going too, of, man, we would love to fight another unfunded federal mandate, which is exactly what this is, that is going to cost our taxpayers dollars. And again, I'm not saying we wouldn't provide some level of coverage to our plan participants for a COVID test. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's a reasonable thing, but I don't like these unfunded federal mandates that are coming down on the taxpayers of Warren County. So that's, I'm thinking, you know, we've led from this board in many circumstances, and sometimes things that even take on national significance. And I'm thinking, wait, can we fight this? Under what grounds can we fight this? Because again, it's not the concept of a covered individual, should we provide a COVID test for them and the plan pays for it? I think the answer to that question is, yeah, sure, I get that. But having 2 tests per month for perpetuity, and even though I signed a piece of paper, who's really policing that and who's going to be the resale police that I got a test for free at the taxpayer's expense and I'm going around and selling them for $50 online? No one's policing that. That's ridiculous to think that's going to be policed. So that's what I'm thinking.
I'm curious, Tammy, would the pharmacy benefit manager enter into a contract with us where the benefit is less than what the mandate is?
I asked that question and they won't.
Yeah.
They won't, and neither will United Healthcare, so like a lesser amount. If the board did not want to offer this benefit, to offer a lesser benefit, they would need, both would need something from us, from the board, that says that they're opting out of coverage, and they would just simply turn it off to where there would, so it's all or none with the carriers.
Prior,
That's-
I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay, so prior to today, or prior to the time that we're going to have to be forced to adopt something like this, and somebody that's within our plan thinks they have COVID, what did they do? They went to the doctor, they got a test, right?
Or they went to the ER, probably.
Well, I actually did this, and because I had kids who we thought, and we took them to the doctor, and they got tested, and sometimes there was a negative test, and once there was a positive test. And I'm, of course, covered by this plan, and it's a family plan with my children. So what happened prior to this point in time?
So in that situation, those kind of tests where you're going to a doctor's office setting to get them, or an emergency room, you know, at the doctor's office, they would bill the plan, and the plan would pay the cost of that test, as well as there would be an office visit added to that. That estimated cost of getting the PCR COVID test in a doctor's office setting is $80 for the test alone, plus the office visit that would come with that.
So previously, we were covering this.
Yes.
Was it part of the deductible at all, or anything like that?
Yes, it did go towards deductible. I have to think
Okay,
back on that.
all right. So, see, I'm trying to figure out what we've done before and how it applies with our current plan, because we've been going down this COVID rule, or this, you know, this whole thing since, 2020. And we're now in 2022. And so we've already been having, a lot of people have gotten sick, a lot of people have been tested, our plans have covered it, it's got a deductible that applies. Nobody out there is jumping off a bridge with what we've currently done. Now, all of a sudden, the government's changing this, and how will the change impact, in your estimation, the costs of what we were incurring before for this and the costs going into the future? Do you have an idea?
Well, there'd be it wouldn't apply to it wouldn't apply to your deductible or co-insurance. It's outside of that at 100%.
So there's
So it would cost the plan more money. I mean, that's the
my
impact.
question. So So this is going to cost us more money, and you gave us an estimate on how much more it was gonna cost us?
For an annual, and I think it's probably to be expected that, the COVID emergency is gonna be extended, they just extended it for the 8th time. So looking on an annual base, at our current employee population is $2.2 million.
Plus the admin cost. So, I mean,
Yeah, which is-
theoretically, it could cost $2.5 million, but as Commissioner Jones says, that's assuming every participant maxes out their benefit with the test, and that's not reality. But would it cost us several $100,000 to $1 million? I mean, that's purely possible. I mean,
Yeah, but this is real money.
oh, yeah, no, it's not a little bit of money. I mean, it's,
And that's in addition to what we've already been doing, right? Where we covered it.
Correct. None of that is going away. You know, I
This is-
think.
And the theory, and did they explain the theory of why we needed to do this? How did this advance to protect our plan participants? How does this help our,
Unless if it's to stop the spread.
I think part of the rationale had to do with accessibility and kind of going down that same route that you just went down, Commissioner Grossman. Previously, correct, you would, if you felt like you had COVID, you would go to your doctor, get a COVID test. That gets billed to the plan really at a much higher rate than it would be billed to the plan to just go to Walmart and get an over-the-counter test for $12. So in some ways, I think the rationale is if we make this more accessible, the easy test more accessible, maybe that will cut down on some of the costs plans are incurring now.
and you see, the thing that I don't understand, I mean, these tests have gone way down in price. They've been accessible at pharmacies. I know that there's times that they've been out, but I don't understand, and now this is just a general comment, because I'm being forced to do something that I don't think I have a choice about. That's where my first set of questions were, do I really have to do this? But why it is that the private market that's providing tests at a very economical rate, that are highly effective in terms of determining whether you've got COVID or not. I actually went out and bought some of those tests when I had family members that thought they maybe had COVID, and one did and others didn't. And I paid for the test kit. It cost $20.
yeah, but, I mean, the federal government's rationale is there's some employee, you're doing that twice a week, all of a sudden that's an undue burden on people that can't afford it. I get that part of it.
Well, and it might discourage people from getting tested and then exposing others.
Yeah, because there's certain activities you're required to have a negative test before you go do it. I mean, it's not as the world exists around here, but you have to show a negative test in doing a lot of things.
At this point, do we know, and I don't know whether we've looked at that in this thing, what's going on with our employees? I know a lot of people have had COVID recently, that's correct?
Well, we just approved an increase in our insurance payout, what you were paying on claims because of COVID, like $200 and some thousand, wasn't it?
I think just recently, Jeff filed the paperwork for the ARPA funds.
Right, so we can utilize our ARPA dollars to reimburse ourselves for COVID-related expenses, and medical expenses are part of that. We are still working through the final rule, and it's our opinion that we could utilize the ARPA dollars to reimburse ourselves for the mandated 8.
So we could sequester the $2.2 million of
Yes.
that, and if it's not
Yes.
used in the period of the emergency, then you return what's
That's
left,
correct.
essentially. Well, I mean, that's at least, it's
That
not-
protects our health
It's
insurance
not
fund.
uncommon for the federal government to require mandates of health insurance plans. That's what, and it's frustrating every time they do it, regardless of what it is. That's what they do, and we, are always pushing back. This is no different, except for the circumstances, but this could be a requirement for some other test, colon cancer screening. That happened. It used to not be a required benefit. It's now a required benefit because it was mandated. This to me seems like a temporary mandate that I don't think will be utilized to the $2.2+ million for it. You've done a lot of homework in trying to protect against fraud, but I actually think our members, our, employees are good, upstanding people and aren't going to abuse the system. And since the federal government also provided resources to us for this precise purpose, it seems like we do it, we sequester the resources necessary, and whatever it is, and we send back the rest. I don't think there's gonna be massive fraud or abuse by our own employees in our covered lives.
I don't think anyone's suggesting.
I know
that.
you're not. I wasn't suggesting you were. I'm just saying, I just don't think if people need the tests, they need the tests. It's hard to find the tests right now. They are expensive in pharmacies right now, and I don't think it's an undue burden on our employees to go to a Walmart, to utilize the tests. They have a recourse if Walmart is out, and we have the federal dollars to utilize. I don't know that this is the bone to pick with the federal government. There are probably lots of them to pick, but.
Yeah, no, like I said, I was just thinking through all these, another unfunded federal mandate, that even if conceptually I agree that the health insurance company should be paying for some level of testing, I think that's a reasonable expectation, but 2 tests per week for every family member indefinitely seems excessive to me. And again, do we have any special consideration simply because we are using taxpayer dollars to do that? I don't think we do. My gut tells me I don't think we do, because it's not a tax. They're not collecting it. They're basically saying, we are the administrator of all healthcare plans at the federal level. You are a covered plan, even though they're all individually administered by the state, really. I guess they've trumped that in some ways. Health insurance plans are state administered. But somehow I'm sure they know what legislative authority they're acting on, so I don't, my gut is, yeah, I don't know how we fight this.
Well, and I guess I would say is if we follow the law and we have the federal dollars to be able to sequester, to be able to fund it at the maximum, that it's in our interest to encourage our employees who need testing to utilize this benefit and not go to their physician unless symptoms warrant that, because it's a lot more expensive that way.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's much better, it's much more cost effective. If you've got the sniffles, you think you're sick, it's much better to do an at-home test than go into a doctor's office. That is a fact. It's much more, correct, Tammy?
Yes, yeah, because going to the doctor's office, that $12 test is, now becomes a, $150 bill.
$120, $150, yeah.
So, yeah.
And at the emergency room, it's hundreds of dollars.
I agree with you. It's just that premise of another federal mandate.
I get it.
Do we, and that's the only reason I was bringing it up, can we? Well, there's 2 things. Should we and can we? And even before I was answering the should we question, it was the can we question I was looking at first. And I don't, without debating all of the merits of should we do this, can we do this? And I think I've answered my own question of no, I don't believe we can fight this simply because these taxpayer dollars are not going back to the federal government in some sort of a tax or anything like that. This is clearly mandating some sort of a benefit to the covered employees, and they've, as Commissioner Jones rightly points out, they've done that in the past, and we've had to do that. We have fought certain things, Couple examples, and I don't even want to open up that can of worms, but we've done that in the past and said, sue us. That's not the case here. This is a serious public health matter. We do try to encourage, if you've got it, stay at home. You know, don't go out and continue to spread it.
Yeah, I totally share in your frustration about it. In this case, though, we have the ARPA dollars to, everything you say, I'm following your rationale completely, but we do have the federal ARPA dollars that I would certainly recommend, if we proceed down this path, to sequester that, so that we're sure that those funds are there at the maximum if it should happen. But I would, I would be surprised if it is, especially since only 20% of our employees have used the vaccination benefit through the health insurance.
I just want to be perfectly clear, since it's a public meeting, we are not saying only 20% of Warren County employees are
You're using
vaccinated.
the health department,
That the vast majority of people, in this room, I have a feeling it's at least 75% of the people in this room have used the health department.
Yes, through their clinics that they held open,
So
yeah.
I don't want to give the impression, oh, we're saying only 20% of our employee base is vaccinated. We don't think that. We know that's a much, much, much higher number than that, and rightfully they should be. All right, now, I think I will officially drop the baton on this one of trying to fight the good fight, because it's only the good fight from the standpoint of a federal mandate that's unfunded. It's not, is it a good fight to say we shouldn't pay for some level of at-home testing for our employees? I actually think we should, but what that level of reimbursement should be, how many tests that should be, I think that should be at our discretion based on our own circumstances on the ground. That's should be left up to the particular jurisdiction, in my opinion, but we don't have that luxury. So again, fundamentally, do I agree with the plan paying for testing? I want to be clear, yes. But do I agree with the federal government mandating that we spend taxpayer dollars on this? Absolutely not.
Well, our plan already has been covering it.
Not really. It comes out of your deductibles. So,
I know that.
So you're really not covering it.
But, yeah, you are. It depends on where the deductible is. But our plan covers a lot of things that are in the deductible. And this is changing the normal way in which we've covered healthcare.
There are certain benefits that are not covered by the deductible, right?
Wellness benefits, so the colonoscopy that.
At 100%, those are at 100%.
Yeah, so it costs the employee nothing to go get a colonoscopy.
Correct.
Right, yeah, that one's age-based, but
Your physical every year.
Your mammogram.
Right.
Yeah.
Stuff like that's preventative, the plan covers it 100%, and if you don't see a doctor another day throughout the year, you don't spend another dollar on healthcare, correct?
Correct, yes.
But under this, if you went to the doctor and got a COVID test, you are spending $80 because it's not been reimbursable. That's not a covered expense to date.
It's, I need to look back on that. I think if I personally went, when I thought I had COVID, I didn't at the time, I tested negative. But I went to the doctor because I thought that I had COVID. And this was early on, and they didn't test me. It was later that they tested me. And because I went there specifically because I thought I had COVID, I left with like $200 going towards my deductible because they didn't.
It wasn't a physical.
At the time, they said they have only like 3 COVID tests, and they weren't going to use it on me because they didn't think I had it. So, but then a week later, I tested positive. So, it kind of depends. Like if you have COVID and you go into the hospital, you're being treated for your inpatient, and the diagnosis is COVID, the plan gets those expenses. They also go towards deductibles and co-insurances.
Tell me what that is. Wait, say that again, that for any, I go to the hospital because I'm sick, or I go to the hospital because I have a broken leg and I test positive for COVID. What happens with the
It
money
would go
side of it?
towards, it would go towards your deductible and co-insurance, and if that's satisfied, then the plan, from the onset of COVID to the end of 2021, the plan had paid, for tests, immunizations, and COVID-related diagnosis. I think it was about $800,000 the plan has paid over that period
Can I
of
make
time.
one other point since we're talking about health insurance? I'm just so glad that the federal government, in their infinite wisdom, two things that Warren County has been saying consistently for, what, a year and a half now, that number one, cloth, something and others that come up over your mouth are not really masks. They don't do anything. I think the federal government is publicly saying that now, number one. And number two, the federal government is now starting to make a distinction of being in the hospital from COVID and being in the hospital with COVID. Isn't that amazing that they're now actually saying that, as opposed to, no, you were in a car wreck. You went in because you were hit by a truck and you happen to have COVID. You're not a COVID patient in the hospital. You just have, but yet that's the way it was counted. Until recently, now the federal government's, well, you know, there is a distinction. I'm sorry, I digress when I get on this roll.
Okay.
Well, look, we have to do what we're mandated to do, so we're gonna comply with the law. And if we're able to, you know, use these ARPA funds, I think that I agree with Commissioner Jones that we should preserve our, you know, our tax revenues and the people that pay us money to run this county, and that to the extent that we have access to funds that help to secure our normal tax base, I think we should do that. I agree with Commissioner Jones on that. And otherwise, do we need to pass something today? And I saw that there seemed to be different options we had.
That was, you know, if you opted out and said, we don't want to comply with that mandate, you know, is there a way to, you know, so a decision in complying with that mandate would be to make a decision as to who administers that, which would be United Healthcare or Optum. So that would be a decision moving forward.
Your recommendation, though, is Optum.
Is Optum. Yeah.
So your direction is all we need. You do not need a resolution, I believe. Just your direction, and Tammy can provide that response to
So what are-
UHC.
So so we're not going to try to thwart a legally required mandate unless our council tells us that that's a great idea, which I'm assuming you're not. Okay. So it's just a guess that you weren't going to do that. So we'll comply with that. Are there other choices that we have beyond compliance that make a difference here? Are there other things that we have a choice about or not?
You know, the only other thing, I talked to United Healthcare and Optum, and chime in, Katie, if you understand it differently than me, but they do have an opt-out feature if we did not want them to administer that benefit for us. We could go, there's a conversation going on between Horan and Chart Snyder as to whether if the board wanted to, then there would be some legal issues in doing that, but if the board wanted to provide coverage for a lesser amount of tests, I put in here such as for that the feds are giving per household, or whatever number that might be.
But
It
isn't
might-
that part of the mandate, the number of tests we have to cover?
It is, yes. Is the 8
So then
per-
we wouldn't be compliant, but this is,
But you would be providing the benefit that you feel is right to provide to employees under the health plan,
But
just
it
not
would-
to that extent.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be, it'd be hard to administer outside of a pharmacy provider. We would have to go to a Chart Snyder or someone like that to administer. Employees would have to be reimbursed. It would be that type of arrangement.
Tammy, my understanding was, assuming we're going to comply with the whole of the mandate, didn't United Healthcare put together like 3 different options of ways that you could do that?
Correct.
Okay.
One would be through Optum, one would be through United Healthcare, or one would be a combination of both those. Or I guess you could go out outside and do like with Chart Snyder, and we want you to administer this benefit for us because possibly it might be less expensive to set up that plan for them to administer opposed to the fees that Optum or United Healthcare would charge us to administer that benefit.
Well, what do you recommend? Is there a more cost-effective way of doing this?
I
instead
don't
of
know that I would
combining?
recommend that because I think in going outside, we wouldn't have that preferred retailer. And like Katie said, if that test, that COVID rapid test became $75, the plan would be responsible to reimburse $75, where with the preferred retailer through Optum or United Healthcare.
But you're recommending the Optum route.
Right, to go to, as mandated, yes, yes.
Okay. All right.
We tried to look for a fight, even though we're trying to be respectful to the employees, but again, I don't think this is the one to fight.
Okay, so your direction is to comply with the mandate and go through Optum. I think
Very
that's what I'm
good.
hearing. And to make sure that our funds are preserved through
Yes.
the ARPA funds. Okay.
We will
Thank
do
you.
that.
Katie, thank you for digging so much into this, appreciate it.
Welcome.
And thanks, Tammy.
She's our expert.
We did wrap up our blood draws last week. We had about 640 employees participate in that. So the window is still open till the end of May for any employee that didn't make it to the onsite.
How
And
does that
Katie,
compare to past?
You're deep into this, you see anything.
It's
that
close.
we could go
I'd like to see
after.
that number a little higher, but it may get higher. There's
Let us
a
know.
lot of spouses, it's not quite convenient for them to come here and do the test, so, they're doing like the test on demand. So, yeah. Yeah. We'll continue to promote that, though, to get that number up. So,
Tammy, while you're here, is the preferred of our insurance, the preferred joint replacement, like, that's just for knees, right?
It is through Christ Spine and Joint Center.
Okay.
And it's knees, it's back, it's not, there are certain joints, like shoulders is not a part of that yet, but I know that they're,
What about hip?
I'm certain that it is, but I can confirm that. It's like the major joints, so like knees, hips, back.
Thanks.
We get some positive feedback about that, the simplicity of the program when it works. It's fairly new, but, they have to guarantee their work. So if you need a repeat surgery, it's at no expense, so. It's a win for the plan and the member.
Not that I know anybody who needs a hip replacement anytime soon.
There's a concierge service where you would connect with them, and whoever this person is, I'd be happy to give them the information. And they will guide you from start to finish. And it results in one bill that's all encompassing of every service that was incurred because of that, so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Okay, is there anything else?
I don't know if he has.
No one else? Very good. Okay. If there's nothing else, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
And yes?